Good morning. I hope you're well. I am doing very, very, very well. This week is a very big week. There has been a lot that's happened over the last, I guess it's been 3 weeks since I had the last stream, and so much has happened. Yep, buckle up, get ready. If you're watching this at least a couple hours after the recording is done, then you can use the chapter markers below to like kind of navigate to where you want to go. There's one thing in particular that I've kind of left until the end, but it's a fairly exciting thing in my opinion, which will be called, like the chapter will be called like hand competition or something like that. And definitely recommend, definitely check that out if you're getting a bit, I don't know, kind of bored in the motion capture stuff. Bit of a spoiler, but we'll get there when we get there. Cool, okay, so the first thing that I want to mention this week is that I am now engaged, which is very exciting. Yeah, it was a bit of a long day. We were 3 pitches up of a 8-pitch massive climb in the Blue Mountains called Bunny Bucket Buttress, and yeah, the day ended up being not quite what we imagined. We were hoping to be out by 2 p.m. We ended up coming out and getting back to the car at 2 a.m. the next day, so that was slightly unexpected, but yeah, it was fantastic. It was very, very exciting. Unfortunately, there are no photos that I can show you because we were too like tired and I don't know, not really thinking about photos that much at the time, but yeah. So at some point soon, you might see a ring on my finger, which is very cool, very exciting. Yeah, and obviously I'm very, very happy about that. It's very fun. Cool, okay, now on to project updates. As you will have seen in the thumbnail, we finally have motion capture. And it is amazing. Let me quickly show you my room, show you how I've got it set up. So right now, you can see me there. Here is the first camera, up here. There's another one over here. Oh, another one over there. And the fourth one is behind this big like umbrella thing, which is kind of annoying. It's in a bit of an annoying spot. I can't I've got too many things in this room, basically, that I have to, now I'm at the point where depending on what I'm using, I have to move things around to facilitate using that thing. But it's fine, it works. It's so good. Yeah, there's the other one, you can see it behind me, up in the corner there. So I have 4 of these motion capture cameras. In the description, you can find a link to the spec sheet for these cameras if you're interested in checking it out. I go through it a little bit in this stream, but yeah, if you want more details, you can have a look over there. Yeah, it's so good. I've literally been wanting this since like before the project started, really. Like I have a little bit of experience using this when I was in uni, and I was like, this is pretty damn cool. And then as soon as this project started, I was like, I have to get this at some point because this is like the end goal of tracking things in space. And I have not been disappointed at all. It's so good. So how does it work? So I want to give you a bit of a rundown of how the software looks for me and like what it can actually do. Because I'm obviously still fairly new to this, so there's so much in this software which is called QTM that I don't know about and like haven't really explored yet. But even what I have looked at, it's so cool. So here we can see, actually let's first off go to the video mode. So this allows us to see the video output of all the cameras. It's very dark because I've like massively lowered the, I basically intentionally made the images very dark on the lenses. You can change the aperture, and I've done that so that we don't get like mistaken markers. And you can see those really bright dots are where the markers actually are. So if I grab one of the balls and I move it around, you can see that's where that ball is. And the way that it tracks this is with infrared light. So each of these cameras is spitting out infrared light, extremely bright, allegedly, and obviously you can't see it. Although, one strange thing that I'm kind of curious about, when I was setting this up, I had my face like very, very close to some of these cameras at some point while they were on, and like you can't see it, so it doesn't look like anything. But I definitely felt a little bit weird after going through the setup process of these. And they do recommend in the data sheet or whatever it is for these cameras, they're like, hey, you can't see infrared light, like our eyes can't detect it, but you should probably just like not put your face right next to it for an extended amount of time when they're on, just because it's probably not the best idea, maybe. So it seems like there's not really much of a medical like consensus on or there's no like indication that this is actually bad, but you should probably just not do it. I don't know. But thankfully, at least if I just like don't look at them too closely when I'm in the room, it's not too bad. But yeah, so they're spitting out a bunch of infrared light, and then they look for that infrared light to come back. So if I have, like here I've got this metal plate, which is reflective, but not retro-reflective. So obviously, like if light hits this, like I can shine the light back to you from the light that's right next to the camera, and that's brighter than normal. And same thing over here, if you look at camera 2, if I position that in just the right way, then you can see that it's reflecting that infrared light back and it's picking it up, and that's making it that red square. Actually, I might go a bit closer so it's a bit more obvious. There you go, yeah. But if I turn it the wrong way, it's not reflecting at all. That is in contrast to what's called retro-reflective stuff, which sends the light back to where it came from, irrespective of what orientation the thing is at. So here I've got this tape, which I can have in whatever orientation I want, and that's always sending that light straight back to the camera. And that camera can then see that light and say, hey, cool, there is a thing here. There is something that is returning my infrared light back to me, so I'm gonna like focus on that thing. So these are constantly doing this all the time, and then when they all, so yeah, in this intensity view, you can see what things are reflecting the light, and this is extremely helpful. This made me realize that there are a lot of things in my room that are reflective, and I had to go around and like tape up anything that's reflective, and like you can see that I've got the backdrop sheet behind me down here, because if I have this up, that is where I'm storing my other retro-reflective tape. And we can see, if we go into the view here, it's picking up all of that tape, and it will actually detect those as markers. These giant circles up here, that's no good. We don't want them. That's gonna muck up the system and make it confused. So now, every time I use the motion capture system, I have to lower this down a bit. It also sometimes picks up this metal bar here, reflects light, so I have to have it down below that, which is a little bit annoying, but whatever, is what it is. Okay, yeah, so once it detects these hotspots of like reflection, it fits a circle to that hotspot. I think you can use non-circular markers, but I don't really know how that works. So for now, I'm only using circular markers, so it will always fit a circle to whatever that shape is. And that's why you could, when we could see the tapes that were stacked up there, it was just like a giant circle rather than a rectangle, which is what it actually was. So they each individually see these, and so we can see what all the cameras can spot. And these right now, these are markers on the base of Joggerbot. And for this fourth one up here, these are all the markers that are on my desk here. So as I cover these up, you can see they kind of disappear from view then. So that's all like, yeah, cool, whatever, all right. The really cool thing is when you combine all of these feeds together, and we can get a 3D view. So this gives us something like this, where I can take, for example, this thing, which is a wand that has 2 markers on it. And as I move this around, hopefully you can see that in the video, these are being tracked now at currently 300 frames per second with sub-millimeter accuracy. So we can see our markers here. I don't know why that opens up like that. Yeah. So these markers that are moving around right now are being tracked. They have a 2mm residual, which is not great. And this is actually something that I want to talk about, which is that it turns out when you're using these systems, if you want them to be as accurate as possible, you actually need to do the calibration process fairly often, because these cameras are so sensitive and they're so precise. If any of the cameras move a little bit, then they lose that, like what their orientation is with respect to each other. So we can see here, I have last done the tracking, let's see, 45 hours ago. So that was about 2 days ago. And it says the last measurement, the residuals are okay. So it's not great. So I actually want to show you in the stream here, I figured this would be a good time to actually show you what that calibration process looks like, just in case you're interested, because I think it's kind of cool. Yeah, so, and right now we can see all of these base nodes, their residuals are like 3mm. This is the most I've ever seen, and this is very high. So, how do we calibrate this system? What we do is we take, sorry, my desk is very messy right now. This is something that I want to actually seek feedback on, but I'll get there when we get there. So we have this thing, which is a very precisely manufactured L bracket, and we can put this on the ground somewhere. That just has to be visible by all 4 cameras. So let's just make sure that that's in a good spot. Let's go to here, and go to here, and go to video. Actually, no, we can make sure that's, there's one thing we need to do first, which is that when we calibrate, we can only have these 4 markers on this L bracket and these 2 markers on the wand visible. If there are any other markers visible, the system will be like, oh, hang on, which marker is which? And it will get all confused. Which is very annoying because I really want to have markers that I have fixed on Jugglebot and that don't move. Which means that every time I calibrate, which I have to do fairly often, I have to cover those markers up. And so right now I have a bunch of markers on Jugglebot's base, and I will get to what I'm doing with those in a little bit. But first, every time we calibrate, come on camera, why are you so slow? I have to cover these markers up. So let me move the chair out of the way. Yeah, that's right. So I've printed these little caps that I can put on top of all of these markers so that they are covered up. Because I really don't want to be taking these off and putting them back on again, because then they'll be in slightly different positions every time. But I need to cover them up in some way. And this is also good because it will stop my cats from fucking munching on them, which they seem to love to do, which is very annoying. Okay, so those are all covered up. And now we can make sure that our L bracket is visible by all the cameras, which it is currently not. And let's make that one bigger. It's kind of frustrating because where I've positioned, there we go, that's just in view. Where I've positioned these cameras, they don't have like a huge, I've tried to like minimize the amount of overlap that they've got so that I can maximize the volume that we're actually seeing. Well, I tried to minimize the overlap on the ground at least, because we don't really care about the ground, which means that positioning this L thing is a bit tricky. Cool, okay, so now we only have 4 markers visible on each one, which is the 4 of the L bracket, which is good. And now we can go into calibration mode. And we can set how long we want to run this calibration for, and we can set a delay, which is very helpful because there is very little space that I can stand in this room where I'm not blocking one of the cameras. So when I do this calibration, I have found the best way for me to do it is to go all the way over here, hide in the corner so that I'm not in the way of this one, and then I can wave this wand around. And wherever I move this wand, the system will calibrate that area and will say, yep, like, so this wand has a known dimension and it's very carefully manufactured. And I have entered in that length into the system, and that way, as I move this around, it knows these 2 dots should always be 300.6 millimeters apart from each other. So everywhere, like as I'm moving this around, each of these cameras is, the whole system is taking that into consideration, and then it uses that to figure out where the 4 cameras are themselves. So this will run for 45 seconds. And I can just kind of, yeah, move it around. There we go. Let's see how we did. Calibration passed. Good job. And now we can see, oh yeah, it exits. Bum, bum. Go 3D view. Now our residuals are down at like 0.3 millimeters, way less. So if I take off all of our little covers on the base and take away the L bracket thing, we can see that the base markers, the largest residual that we've got now is actually 1.3 mil, which is still actually quite a bit. It's more than I would have thought. But yeah, if I do that calibration again, I can get even more like precise measurements. And something that's really cool in here is you can actually see what volume has been calibrated. And you can see like what volume is covered by all of the cameras. And it's very neat. I don't know if this is possible, but I would love to be able to like put in 3D models into this system. Like if I could just, I've got a model of my room that I was using to kind of like spec out how many cameras I would need and where I would need to put them. If I could just put that model into here, it'd be so much more helpful, because here it's like, okay, cool, this is the calibrated volume, but like, where actually is that? You can see where I was standing. I was just kind of arcing around myself there. Yeah. Yes, so that's the calibration process, and we now have much more accurate tracking than before. Definitely there. The lowest residual is 0.09 millimeters. Nuts. That's crazy. Okay, yeah, so that is a very quick rundown of how this works. I then have, so I've got a bunch of other markers as well, like I've got big ones and small ones, which I can use to like put on things, and these have M3 and M4 threads respectively, so I can attach these to whatever I want. And then I also have big balls, well, juggling balls. You may remember a little while ago I tried wrapping one of the balls in this retroreflective tape, and that did not really work very well. It was, I don't know, you can see it's like an armadillo skin, it's not good. So I asked Kai what he used, and he used this fancy retroreflective tape, which is pretty damn expensive, but I've used that to now wrap 5 balls, and that tape is so much better. It conforms to the shape of the ball so much better. Of course, there are still creases because you can't, like, it's topologically impossible to wrap a ball in a flat shape without having creases. And I could have made fewer creases if I had more strips, but as it was, wrapping these 5 balls still took like 3 hours or something. So yeah, definitely, I don't regret doing as few strips as I did. It would have taken so long to do more. Good to see you, Stormy. Yeah, I hope you enjoy it when you view the whole thing. And we can see even with these creases, the tracking is still like fantastic. Like, it might be a little bit, let me zoom in a bit. As I move this around, like, this is so good. It's so perfect. It's amazing. As I said, there's still a lot that I have to learn about how to actually use this software and how to label things. And one thing that I would love to do is that if you have a recording of a video, you can play it back and have like a streamer, you can view like the tail of the path as it moves, which I think is sick. Here I was just like tossing the ball around. But I think viewing that in real time would be so cool. And so you can see here, I actually lost tracking for a second. I think I blocked it with my hand. But yeah, being able to do that in real time would be awesome. But unfortunately, I don't know if there's any way to do that. Yeah. Also, if you're curious, I have included the docs for this software in a link for this description. So if you want to check anything out, then you can head there to do that. Okay, cool. Let's head back to this. Yes, so the cameras default to 340 frames per second. That's like their baseline. I can bump that up to 650 frames per second if I'm really keen, but that lowers the resolution, like quarters the resolution from 2 megapixels down to 0.5 megapixels. So right now, I actually can't even run it at 340 hertz because my PC is not able to reliably stream to my Linux PC that quickly. The fastest that I've been successful at doing it continuously at is 300 hertz, which is still pretty damn fast. So I may be able to bump that up further if I do lower the resolution. So we might even be able to get like 500 hertz at a lower resolution because there's less data to process. But honestly, 300 hertz is nuts. Like that's plenty for now, at least. I don't anticipate needing more than that anytime soon. Yeah, so there are some interesting things with these cameras. One is that these cameras should not be able to see each other. One thing you may have noticed in our views, if I go back to the video view, it might be kind of hard to tell because they're so dark, but none of the cameras are visible in any of the other cameras' frames. I didn't originally have this like this, and I had like the two in the opposite sides of the room were just able to see each other. And the problem that creates is that each of these cameras, you kind of want them to be as in sync as possible so that your data is in sync. And that means that they're all emitting their light at the exact same time, hopefully, as close as possible to the exact same time. And if one camera is able to see another camera, then that means that it detects that light in the exact same way that it'll be detecting that light from a retroreflective object. So it kind of like messes up the system, and it's like, hang on, there's a marker over there, but none of the other cameras can see it, and it just kind of gets a bit confused. You can have you can like offset them just a little bit. You can put them in different groups, so that way they'll flash at slightly different times, but that makes the system a little bit more computationally intensive and a little bit slower as a result. And you have like slightly increased latency, as far as I'm aware. I want to also say there's a massive asterisk on all of this. which is that I'm very new to this, and there's a very decent chance that a decent amount of what I say could be wrong. So just keep that in mind. But it is definitely true that they should not be able to see each other. Yeah, so that was a little bit annoying because I had to like move them ever so slightly out of the way of each other. And actually, there's one thing that I wanted to mention before this, but I forgot, and I'll be remiss if I didn't say it, is that these, so the way that I've mounted these is, that's not a very helpful view. I've put this bar around the, like near the roof, and that way I can kind of position the cameras wherever I want. And I'm using these things called super clamps to mount these, and you can see one on that. Oh my god, this is so jerky. You can see this clamp here, which is really, they're very, very cool clamps. But, well, and they are rated for 5 kilograms according to the Amazon datasheet. These cameras weigh 700 grams, but as you can see here, by this string, which is like a backup support for this camera, these cannot hold 5 kilograms, they cannot even hold 700 grams. And that was so frustrating. So all of the cameras are either resting against the wall so that they can't slide down any further than they already are, or are very precariously balanced so that they don't move at all. Like this one here is just kind of like, it's got just enough weight over the bar that it's not tipping around. But this one was too far extended out, and I've had to support it with string, which seems to be working, but we'll see how that goes. We'll see how it holds up. Yeah, so this has definitely been quite a process, getting all this set up and learning how to do it properly. Another cool, interesting thing is that markers on a rigid body need to be asymmetric. If you have a rigid body and you have symmetric markers on there and you want to track that as a rigid body in space, which is something you can set up in this software, you can say, hey, if you see markers in this kind of arrangement, that is X rigid body, and I want to have position and rotation data of that rigid body. Those markers need to be asymmetric. If they are symmetric, then there's no way to, like you end up with multiple solutions to that problem. Like if you have like an equilateral triangle, that can be this way, or it can be flipped 180 degrees, or it can be rotated by 120 degrees. And yes, you need asymmetry in here. As we've seen, the calibration needs to be done fairly regularly. And this is kind of annoying because these tools, these calibration tools, they specifically say, be really careful with these, make sure you don't like knock them around too much because this length is a very precise length, and if that gets mucked up, it's going to screw up all future calibrations for the rest of time. But there's no way to store this. The box that this stuff came in is this like shitty little cardboard box which arrived all like, that's not coming up on camera, but it arrived like all dented up, and it's just so like crap to open and like use. So I really don't want to be putting these tools back in here every time because this box is only going to survive about 10 more openings and closings. Even already the corners are starting to like fall apart. So I need some way to put these that is not visible to the system in normal operation, and is also very safe for me like banging them around, which is kind of, I don't know where to put them. So right now they're just sitting on my desk, which is not a good spot because these have like spiky pins out the bottom, which is going to scratch up my desk. It's a whole thing. Yeah, any ideas for how to store these? This does separate, which is kind of handy. Like I can separate the handle from the markers, but yeah, I don't know. I got to figure out some way to put them. I did not like their packaging. Okay. Oh, one other final little thing is very unexpected. My monitor that I have here is a fairly large monitor, and it actually has a remote that it came with. And annoyingly, and of course that remote uses infrared light to like communicate with the monitor. Frustratingly, these cameras also use infrared light, and they are mucking around with my monitor. So here I've got the, there's a little infrared receiver here. I've tried covering it up in tape, but still every now and then my monitor will just like turn off, or the volume on it will change, or like the input mode will change, or something random like that. And I've tried covering this thing up with tape the whole way around, but it's still somehow getting signals in. And if anyone has any, I don't know, suggestions for how to block infrared light in a very small area, I would love to know, because this is very frustrating. I'll just be like typing along, then boop, my monitor just turns off. It's like, cool, sick. I didn't need that anyway. funny how things sometimes really work together very nicely and sometimes they don't. All right, cool. So what is my plan for this motion capture system? Right now, well, yeah. So my plan is to have labeled marker sets in QTM, where QTM is the name of this software. This one that I showed before, that does all the measurements and everything. I can have a labeled marker set for the base, one for the platform, and maybe one for the hand as well. And yeah, I can then stream this data to the Jugglebot computer, and then I can have 6-degree freedom data on where these 3 rigid bodies are in space. The one annoying thing is that this labeled data is not streamed with their labels. So like here, when I've got, why? Oh, it's because we're in video mode. This is another weird thing. If you're in video mode on the 2D view and then you go into 3D view, it doesn't change to non-video mode. I don't know why. But yeah, so we can see here, I've got my 6 base markers. They don't stream with that label, like base 1, base 2, base 3, and so on, which is, for me, I find that to be kind of weird, because it'll be very useful to have that information. However, thankfully at least, that labeled data is always streamed in the same order. And the way that this handles occlusions, where one of the markers is blocked, is that they just have not a number as their like positions. So if we go back to here, you can see that all 6 base, can I make this any bigger? All 6 base markers have their data, but if I were to cover one of them up with this little cover, then suddenly base 5 is gone, and that will still be streaming, but it will just be NAN. So that's kind of handy that we can still like segment out. So as long as the base and the platform and the hand are structured in a particular way in this software, as far as I'm aware, they should always be streaming in that exact same order. So we can then distinguish between the base markers, the platform markers, and the hand markers. Currently, I only have base markers, of which I have 6. If you are interested to know where I have positioned these, I've got them in my CAD here. So we can see, like this is the front of Jugglebot, and those like what are currently the boxes, but are now the spheres. So there's one. You can kind of see them around on the base. They're kind of hard to click on. They're pretty small. Yeah, so I've got these in known positions, and I've put these into like these little screw holes, which I just had. These have been in the base the whole time. So yeah, I have 6 of them here. As I said before, like we can't have symmetry, but you will notice that there is these 4 main ones are symmetric, except these 2 here are not. And I'm unsure of, I should potentially move some of these around to have even less symmetry, but it's working so far right now. And I think as long as we don't lose these 2, then we should be fine. If we do lose tracking for these 2, then we might have issues where the whole thing could be flipped upside down, which might be a bit problematic. But yeah, so I may move these around in the future. So the reason why I have these on here, oops, yeah, and you can see these are like the pegs that I used to install them. This was a little bit of a dodgy process. So the holes in the base are M6 threaded holes, but the markers are only M4 markers, and I really wanted to have the markers in as precise a position as possible, so I didn't want to be like drilling new holes just for these markers or anything like that. I wanted to use the holes where I know exactly where they are, because they were cut by a CNC machine. But the threads are the wrong size, so I had to like 3D print these little adapters, I call them. They're a little bit dodgy, they're not all the same size. One of them broke, so that one's, it still works. There's still like 3 threads on there, which is just enough to actually like hold it in place. But yeah, not ideal. And what this means is that all of these markers are actually at slightly different heights. So we can see like this one here is the one that had that broken one. So it's very, very close to the base. This one here is a little bit higher up. That one's pretty high up as well. And most of them are pretty high, but yeah, they're all slightly different heights, which is a little bit annoying, but as long as I know where they are, it's fine, because I just need to record their positions relative to like the Jugglebot base, which is this dot right here. And as long as I know those positions, then we're fine. And the reason why we need them, I'll talk about in just a sec. This dot here, by the way, is the center of all of the legs. It's like the XY is right in the middle of Jogglebot, and the Z height is the plane where the legs cross at the bottom. So interestingly, yeah, the ground for Jogglebot is actually not the ground, it's actually where the legs end. Yep, cool. So there's the markers. And the reason why I have these here is because we need to locate where Jogglebot's origin is in space. Because right now, when we have this view here, as I move things around, like if I move this wand around, we can get the positions of these two dots, but this is relative to this origin down here. And that origin, like the main XYZ that we see here, this is where I had this L frame when we did that calibration before. So wherever I put this L frame, that's, I believe this spot right here is where the origin is going to be. And of course for me, I don't have any like reliable spot where I can put this in the exact same spot every single time. So this can move, and Jogglebot can also move. So our origin, like this means nothing to us. We don't care about this origin. Which is a little bit annoying because when we stream this data, like if I'm moving this ball around, the coordinates that we have for this ball are in terms of that origin, the random one that is nothing to us. So I have these 6 markers on the base, and that allows us to orient where the Jogglebot's frame is, Jogglebot's origin. This word frame is often used as like in robotics for like a coordinate frame. It's like, where is the origin for that object? And that will come up increasingly more in these streams in the future. So by finding where Jogglebot's origin is with respect to the camera's origin, we can then transform all other future readings into the Jogglebot frame. And that way we have everything with respect to Jogglebot's origin, which is exactly what we need. That way, as we move the balls around, we can say, oh, okay, it's 1 meter above Jogglebot's origin and like 50 meters X, 50 meters Y. If we want to catch that ball, we need to move into that exact spot. I believe it is possible in the motion capture software to set this up. Like if we go into 3D view settings, 6-degree of freedom tracking, in here you can actually set an offset for this coordinate system. So like if I wanted to stream, what would be great, I guess, let me start this again. What would be great is if I could just tell this software, I have these 6 markers in this specific spot. The origin of Jogglebot is always going to be however many millimeters away from all of these 6 markers. And so send off that, like have that as our baseline, and then all other measurements for everything else, you can set them to like be with respect to a given rigid body. So I could, in theory, I could stream all other data, like all of the balls that I'm tracking as I move them around, that could be streamed in terms of Jogglebot's origin straight from this software. But unfortunately, they only allow you to do this with like XYZ, roll pitch yaw offsets. And I actually don't know if that changes when certain markers are occluded. I think that might be from like the centroid of all 6 of these markers, which means that if one of them is blocked, that centroid is going to move around and that offset's going to change. So I haven't played around with that yet. Currently, I'm doing all of this like offsetting stuff in my own software, in my own code, but it would be handy, I think, to offload some of this work to this PC. Because all of this is, by the way, if it's not obvious, all of this software can only run on Windows 10 or Windows 11. It cannot run on Linux, so I now have 2 computers kind of working with each other. So my Windows 10 PC, which is currently doing a lot, it's streaming, I've got VNC open, and I've got this thing going at 300 Hertz. It's still purring away, doing nicely. And that's all streaming to the Jogglebot PC, which, yeah, it would be great if I could do it all on one computer, but alas. Okay, if you're curious about how I am doing all of this, like the orienting the 6 markers and like using those to figure out where Jogglebot's origin is, a lot of it was written by ChatGPT, full disclosure. I, of course, supervised it and made sure it's all working nicely, and it took a lot of iteration, obviously, but yeah, all of that code is in Mocap Interface Node and Mocap Interface if you want to check it out. And there's links in the description for the GitHub page for this. So if you just go into like ROS, Jogglebot, you'll find these. And yeah, so in theory, once we have markers on the base and the platform and the hand, we can have that data at 300 Hertz or more, depending on how much we can bump that up, with sub-millimeter accuracy, which is so good. Yeah, there's so much that this opens up, and yeah, I'm so keen to have like this system be solid, but we're getting there. First thing though is that my interest right now has very much been focused on what's called partner juggling, where you have two different, usually this means you have two people juggling together. In this context, it would mean me juggling with Jugglebot. So I would be one hand, Jugglebot will be the other hand. To do this, the system needs to track unlabeled markers. So all of the, like every ball, according to QTM, is just an unlabeled marker. We need to track these, identify when that marker is in parabolic motion, because if I'm just like doing this with the marker, I'm just like zooming it around, I don't want Jugglebot to be trying to catch that because there's nothing to catch. Like I haven't thrown it, so Jugglebot shouldn't be attempting to do anything with it yet. So we need to identify when it's in parabolic motion. If it is in parabolic, well, maybe, we'll get to this. Maybe we can cut out that step. If it is in parabolic motion, then we need to predict where it is going to land and when. And what I mean by landing time here, currently I'm doing the very base, bare bones approach of just when the ball crosses a given height, we're going to consider that to have landed. In all of the stuff that I'm going to show you shortly, landing means hitting the ground, so landing is landing. In the future, my intention is like the next step will be landing will be at like a height that Jugglebot is very comfortable at being at, so that way it can kind of like get to that position at that height and the ball can come in. In the future, we won't be dealing with this like landing position or time. We'll be probably, I suspect, approaching it more from like when the ball crosses through the workspace of the robot, which is stuff that I showed off in the last stream. So check that out if you're interested. So let's have a look. Let's see how this system goes. So one thing that's kind of cool is that this software, whenever I have this open, this is streaming. And if I get rid of me, we can see down the bottom here, the GUI is operating at 25 frames per second. We are currently processing 300, it varies a little bit, like around 300 frames per second. And the cameras are capturing 300, exactly 300 frames per second. And yeah, so this one here where it says like the one that's fluctuating, that's like the streaming rate. And so that's just always streaming. And I can like tap into that on any PC on our network, which is kind of cool. Okay, so what do I need to do to get this demo working? Let's go to this one. Actually, no, let's do this with this. Yeah. All right, so here you can see the Linux computer, the Jugglebot computer, and this is, we've got RViz open, which I've just recently learned how to kind of use. And if I start up my Mocap interface node, we are now connected. So now, there is a ball. Let me make that bigger actually. Actually, what I wanted to do was this. Oh no, let's just do this so you can just see. So here's my ball. This is on Jugglebot's PC, and we can see the ball is just kind of moving around. But if I go to throw the ball, we have a predicted landing site. And that's that green cylinder that appears. Doesn't always work. There's a lot of, this system is a little bit fragile right now, and I will get into exactly how in a sec. But let's see if I'm juggling to myself. Let's see if I sit down. It should usually, there we go, figure out where the landing site is. I need to have a node for like figuring out the accuracy of these predictions and whether or not they were actually correct. But we can see it's qualitatively, and I'll show you in more detail what this actually, like I'll zoom around the camera as I'm showing a similar version of this. I think it seems pretty close from what I can tell. At least for like the simulated data, that one was a bit off. But yeah, so we can see there's a couple issues going on here, but generally, sometimes it's correct. And what I want to show you so that you can see what this should look like is I've got a little simulator that will simulate a ball being thrown so once the ball lands, we wait 2 seconds and then we simulate another one just with like a random start position and start velocity. And I think that this prediction of where it's going to land is pretty bang on. Like it doesn't need to change its prediction very much after it's like made that initial guess. So I'll leave this running for a bit while I have a drink of water. That was a good one, very sideways. But sometimes still, it doesn't work. So there's a bit of tuning that I need to do here to get this to work a little bit more reliably. But in principle, this is how it should be working even with tracked data. Yeah, very cool. All right. So let's go back to here. Maybe I'll leave that running if you want to check it out in the corner. That's pretty cool. Yeah, okay. All right. So how does this work? Currently, we're only able to track a single marker. So this is kind of like issue number 1 with this system. You may have noticed that when I was doing that, at one point I was holding 2 markers, but I had to put the other ones away because if I have 2 markers here, it's like, whoa, hang on, what's going on here? There should only be 1. Big problem, number 1. It gets very confused when there's multiple markers. Also, while this motion capture system is pretty amazing, it does sometimes get confused. For example, something that I learned yesterday, if I am trying to do motion capture work early in the morning, I have to block out this window next to me because there's so much light coming in that reflects off of the floor that it detects markers through the entire floor. There's just like a line of markers going through the ground that don't exist because it's just reflections off of the floor. As I said before, I've also discovered how many reflective things are in this room. I've tried to cover up most of them, but even my skin, because I'm so pasty white, sometimes gets registered as a marker. So even just me moving around can sometimes trigger as markers. And that was definitely happening in that when I was in that demo that I was just giving then. There was errant markers all over the place. So yeah, the system gets very confused when there's multiple markers. Let me hide this for a second so you can actually read the text. Yeah, so I'm trying a few approaches to classify what is projectile motion and what is not projectile motion. All of these approaches are based on, the first step that I'm doing is I've got a buffer of, in this case, what I have it set to right now is 0.1 seconds, where we're taking that data, and for that first 0.1 seconds, we're not trying to predict anything. We're just saying, yep, cool, that's just the data of what we've got. With that, once we have that buffer filled up, then we go in to try to actually figure out if this thing that's being tracked is in projectile motion or not. The first test that I'm running, and so here I've tried this. In actuality, like all of these things are happening at once. Let me get rid of me. So the first thing is the variance of the Z positions over the buffer. And what this means is that if I have a marker, and if I'm just holding it still for 0.1 seconds, that's probably not going to be in projectile motion. If it's moving up or moving down, and there's enough variance in how far it has moved vertically in that 0.1 seconds, then there's an okay chance it's in projectile motion. I could just be doing this, so it might not actually be in projectile motion, but if it's not moving vertically, it's probably not in projectile motion. This, of course, does have issues where if the ball is at its apex, then it's going to be moving vertically much slower, so it may not register as being in projectile motion at that point, but I'm just kind of ignoring those cases for now, at least with this test. So we'll see how this changes over time. The next test is that we fit a quadratic model to the data in the buffer. And for reference as well, at 300 Hertz, this buffer, 0.1 seconds, we're going to have around 30 data points. So the things that we test for in this quadratic model that we fit to this data, I'll give you back the I can't. Yeah, I can. Yeah, you can watch that keep going. So the first thing that we check for is the residuals of the fit. So we say, here is our quadratic model. Here is what the data is actually doing. How close is the actual data to the fit? Like, is this quadratic fit a good fit? If those residuals are too large, meaning that the fit is a poor fit, we say, no, that's probably not quadratic motion. We also look at the coefficient of the t-squared term, which, if you remember your projectile motion from high school, is the term outside of, like, it's basically 0.5 times gravity, or yeah, with gravity being negative acceleration. So we should find that whatever quadratic equation that we fit to this data, it should have a coefficient in front of t-squared of 0.5 times gravity, and if it's not, then it's probably not projectile motion. If all of these tests are passed, then we're probably in projectile motion. There's still a lot of tuning that I need to do to get all of this working properly, but that's the general idea. Some combination of these three tests should give us a pretty good idea of whether or not the object is in projectile motion with just 0.1 seconds of data. Hopefully. Cool. If you are curious to check out this code, it is in ballpredictionnode.py. Why is that space different? That's weird. However, I'm thinking maybe we can simplify this. If we assume that we are always in projectile motion and every object is going to fall, like if it's, yeah, as soon as it's released, or like whatever it's doing, it's going to fall at some point, then we can ignore any balls that will land outside of Jugglerbot's workspace. So even if I have this ball and I'm obviously not, I haven't thrown it, I'm just holding onto it and I'm just zooming it around, if we constantly predict where that ball will land, if it is actually in projectile motion, then we can just ignore all of the ones that are going to land outside of Jugglebot's workspace and just don't even think about them. For the ones that will land in Jugglebot's workspace, we can get Jugglebot to prepare to catch them. I don't know how I feel about this. I just thought of this like as I was preparing the slides for this stream. I was like, do we actually need to predict if it's in projectile motion? Because this is not a trivial test of like classifying whether it's in projectile motion or not. And it would be great if we could avoid that step entirely. I'm not sure. I don't know. The main thing that I want to avoid is having Jugglebot attempt to catch balls that are obviously not catchable. Like if I'm just doing this and Jugglebot's like, whoa, hang on, I need to catch that, and it just like zoops over to try to get it, I want to not have that happen, basically. Okay, so all of this that I've talked about so far is how to determine whether the object is in projectile motion or not. And this is why when we go to our VNC view, you can see the predicted landing site, which is that the green cylinder, that doesn't appear until slightly after the ball has started moving, about 0.1 seconds after, in fact. So that's why that's happening. And so, yeah, obviously like, with this simulated data, of course it's going to be projectile motion because that's exactly what it's simulating, but it's the same thing that's running when I'm doing the markers. Like if let me go back to the motion capture interface. So now as I move this around, there's no predicted landing site because it's probably not in projectile motion. But if I start throwing it, then it should, yeah, look at all those other markers. I think that's me. You're being too reflective. Yeah. It should detect if it's in projectile motion fairly quickly. Of course, as I said, I need to do some tuning to get this working reliably. Let's get that back up. Okay. But how about, actually no, let's hide this view now. You've seen enough of that. What about if we want to, how do we then predict what the landing site of the ball is? And the way that this works, for anyone who's been following along for a while, this may come as no surprise. We are using a Kalman filter to estimate what the actual current state is. So as we've seen, this tracking data, it does have a little bit of noise. Of course, less than a millimeter is not much, but there is still some. And we also have a big issue with occlusions, where the marker goes out of sight of the system. Like it's either blocked, or it's gone too high up, or it's whatever has happened, we can no longer track it. But we want to be able to predict where the ball will land, even if we run into occlusions, and even if the tracking is lost throughout its flight path. And the way that we're doing it, well, the way that I'm proposing to do this is to use a Kalman filter to estimate what the actual current state is. So we have a history of where this object has been throughout the last, I don't know, like throughout its path. But if we lose tracking, we need to know still where it actually is. And this is something that I played around with. I realized when I was finding this script, it was almost 2 years ago that I wrote this one. And this gives you a rough idea of how this will look. So what we're looking at here is the red data is the actual nice, perfect parabolic path. The purple data is like noisy recordings of, like noisy samplings of that data. I believe here that noise has 10 centimeters of like noise in any random direction for each point, which is obviously absurdly high for these cameras. When I made the simulation, I was anticipating using normal depth cameras to do this so that they have a bit more noise. And then this green line that's coming through is every single sample that the Kalman filter receives of this noisy data, it updates where it thinks the rest of the path is going to go. And so at the start, there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's like, whoa, hang on, I don't really know where I am. Like I need to update more and more. And so as it gets more data, it refines this update and ends up getting fairly close to where the ball actually lands. Of course, it's a little bit off, but we're not dealing with 10 centimeters of noise with his motion capture system. We're like, what, 3 orders of magnitude less. So we should be able to predict this landing position extremely precisely, which would be fantastic, especially at 300 hertz. Like that's so much data for this filter to refine over. Look at that fancy little effect there. It took longer than I was wanting it to, but it was worth it. So to get the initial conditions for this Kalman filter, we can take these from that 0.1 second buffer that we've collected. Because recall, that until we have that buffer full for any given tracked object, we're just collecting more data. We're not actually doing any processing on it. Yeah, so the initial position is taken to be the last position from that buffer, because as soon as that buffer is full, then we start the Kalman filter and then we start predicting where it's going to land. So as soon as that buffer is full, we take that last position, we say this is where we're starting. To get the initial velocity, this is calculated using a linear regression on the samples in that buffer. So there's about 30 samples there, and that gives us a good amount of data to predict how fast is moving X, how fast is moving Y, and also how fast is moving Z. Of course, Z is a little bit more complicated because gravity is pulling the thing down, but it should get fairly close to that initial velocity. The more precise, or the more accurate that these initial conditions are, the more accurate the Kalman filter will be by like a lot. Of course, 300 frames per second of data with sub-millimeter accuracy is a lot to like correct that initial guess over, but we want that initial guess to be as accurate as possible. So then, as we're moving along, we update what our current state is with this newly received data, and then we use that to predict the landing position and time. If we run into occlusions where the tracking data is lost, we just continue moving along with whatever the Kalman filter last expected us to be doing. And this is all done with classic projectile motion equations. Cool. So this all seems fine, but of course there's a lot of issues. And as we just saw, it's not quite working perfectly in real life. So what's next? There's 2 big challenges here. One is how to handle multiple markers, and the other is how to handle occlusions, so when the marker's blocked. And frustratingly, these are very closely interrelated, which makes it very difficult to work on one first and then the other. Like you kind of have to build them both up together. Let's start with multiple markers, because we can't talk about them simultaneously. My voice box can only do so much. So I haven't implemented this yet. I actually, in full disclosure, I as is becoming my tendency in these sorts of things, I massively bit off more than I could chew at the very start, and I was trying to, honestly, initially, I didn't even want to have the simulation of this like throwing. I was really just hoping I could just have it predict where it's going to land straight up from like actual raw data, and it would just work. That's not going to happen. So I actually originally had the system cater for multiple objects, and this got very complicated very fast. So I scaled back to just one, and right now I can still, the code is only capable of handling one, but there's still kind of like some vestigial code from when I had multiple markers being tracked at once. And so and that was actually done in a very similar way to what I'm about to describe, so it shouldn't be too hard to implement what I'm about to describe, but we'll see how we go. Of course, I am very open to any suggestions here. This is, yeah, we're pushing the boundaries of what I'm up to right now. Yeah, so the first thing is every tracked object is given a unique ID. So if I go back to this view, God, so many keyboards, so many mice. All right, I don't need that anymore. Let's put that away. So as I move, I actually don't, yeah, so this will track too. So my expectation of how this will work is that each of these markers, as I move them around, these will each have a unique ID. So there you can see something on me is reflective right now. Or it could just be me. Maybe I should get like a black suit that I wear. Yeah, so each of these will have its own unique ID. Then, each is handled as though it might enter projectile motion at any point. So all of this stuff that I described about having the buffer and then using that buffer to determine if it's in projectile motion or not, that whole structure is like run independently for each of these tracked objects. And that should be enough, right? It should be. Because each object has its nice ID, and as I move it around, we know, yep, that's that ID object, and easy peasy. If it enters projectile motion, then we start predicting where it's going to land. If it doesn't, then we just keep tracking it and wait until it does enter projectile motion. How about occlusions? Well, if an object has been deemed to have entered projectile motion, that means that we will have a prediction of where that object is going to be moving in the future, because there's nothing else acting on it other than gravity. So it has a very determined path of where it's going to go, and there's certainly not any wind, at least in here. Any tracked marker that is not in parabolic motion is just ignored, and we can just, if it's lost, so yeah, we do need to keep its history to register if it does enter parabolic motion, but we only need to keep that last buffer. Anything older than 0.1 seconds, we can just ignore and just say, yeah, no, that was just something else. It was just moving around randomly. And if tracking is lost on non-parabolic entities, we can destroy its history. So if I am moving my marker around, and no, it's not 5, 6. Hang on. If I'm moving this marker around and we have the dot, we can say, yep, cool, this has ID 1, let's say. If I cover it up and then I bring it back, this is suddenly a new marker. This will have ID 2 or whatever, however I end up deciding to give these. And so yeah, these ones will just disappear and reappear willy-nilly because they're not in projectile motion, so we don't care about them. I need to get rid of me. If tracking is lost on an object that is in parabolic motion, then the Kalman filter should continue estimating the next states based on the previous ones, as I described before. And then if tracking is regained, and the marker is within a given threshold of where we expect it to be at the current time, then we should update the filter with this new updated data. Basically here, object is moving, we have a prediction of where it's going to go. If the tracking gets lost and the ball keeps moving, we might predict, because our early estimates might be a little bit wrong because there's not very much data to go off of at the beginning. So we might have a prediction that the ball is going to be here, but in fact, when tracking is regained, the ball is actually up here. If that is within a given threshold, which I can tune, then we can say, oh, actually, in fact, this ball that is now tracked again is actually the one that we thought was this one, and so let's update our prediction with this new tracking data, and then continue the prediction with that. So we can kind of say, we have ball 1, ball 1 is lost, but its phantom like data is still continuing, and then ball 1 is back again. This is going to require a fair bit of tuning to make sure that we can handle balls appearing and disappearing, especially because I only have 4 cameras in this room, so there's not perfect coverage of like really high spots. And like if I, what I want to do is to be able to throw from like just behind me here. I don't want to have to be walking around to throw the juggle all the time. So here, thankfully, this spot here can be seen by 3 cameras. But if I move just a little bit over, I can suddenly only be seen by 1. And same thing with high up. Like if I'm up here, this can be seen by 2, but if I'm just a little bit over, I can only be seen by 1. 1 camera is not enough to get 3D data. You need at least 2. So there are definitely some like blind spots in this room that the cameras can't see. So we need to have a system that is robust to tracking being lost. So this is the idea, but of course these two things are very closely related, because as markers appear and disappear, it's going to be very easy for the system to confuse them and say, oh, marker 1 was over here before and now it's disappeared, but another one has reappeared over here. Maybe that's the same one. And I think it's going to take a fair bit of time to tune all of these thresholds to be exactly what we need, so that we don't have like markers or like balls appearing and reappearing everywhere. It'll be a process, but I think it's going to be so good once it's working. Okay, cool. On to the next thing. That's all the update on motion capture, I believe. Yep. I hope you enjoyed it. Next thing. My goodness. Finally, I have updated the motor states. So previously, this is a complete change of pace as well, so just forget all the, well, don't forget, but yeah, freshen your mind, we're on to new stuff. Previously, when I was trying to get data from the robot about what the motors are doing, for example, if I wanted to know the position of the motors or the velocity of the motors, or I don't know, the hand, if I wanted to know like the temperature of the hand or anything like that, I had individual ROS topics that would publish this information. So if I wanted the positions, I would subscribe to motor positions topic, and then I would get that information. This worked, but it was very disjointed and everything was in like different formats, and it was, I don't know, it was very, very patched together, very not elegant. But now, thanks to a suggestion from John, which in hindsight, like this is such an obvious way to do this, but I did not think of it until John suggested it. I have updated this to be so much more elegant. It is beautiful. I love it so much. And I can show you on the actual robot. So let's go to this view. We don't need RViz anymore, so bye-bye. That stuff can stay open, that's fine. So if I run, oh man, there we go. If I run, like open Joggerbot up, it shouldn't need to go through, it doesn't need to go through its initialization sequence because I already ran that yesterday. How good is that? I only need to go through the homing sequence like once every couple days potentially now. As long as I leave it all plugged in, I don't have to do it at all, like not even once a day. It's so nice. Anyway, once that's running, I can go ROS2 topic echo motor states. And look at this. This is great. We have here, I don't think I can increase the size of this at all, so apologies for anyone on mobile, but I'll describe it to you. We have data for all 6 motors with all data that we could possibly ever want. We have if there are any errors, we have if the motor has been disarmed for any reason, we have the current state of the motor, we have the result of the last thing that it did, like if it completed what it was doing or not. The same thing again, but in a slightly different format. We have the estimate of the position, so as I move the robot around, we should be able to see these position estimates change. I can't really see them from here, but hopefully you can. We also have the velocity estimates. We have the the value of current that we are setting the motor to be at right now. I don't actually know why this happens. This would be interesting if anyone knows about this. If I have the motors in like standby mode so that they're not on, this like IQ set point just like steadily increases for some reason. I don't really know why, but then as soon as I enter like closed loop control, it just like shoots back down to nothing. So I don't know. We also have the measured current that the motor is taking. We have the temperature of the MOSFETs that are like driving the motors. We have the temperature of the motors themselves, because it turns out something that I kind of forgot about is that so I put the temperature probe in the hand a little while ago, and that was like a whole thing. It was very exciting. I kind of forgot that the motors that I have on the legs have a thermistor in them already, and the cables are just like there, ready to be tapped into. So I went through and like soldered all the wires on and plugged them all in, and now we have the temperatures of all of the motors, which is pretty awesome. I'm not expecting that to really be that necessary for the legs because they shouldn't heat up that much, but now we'll know. And the last two things that we have is the voltage on the bus at that point, so we can kind of see how the voltage is dropping as we move along the network. And we also have the current that the O drive is drawing from the bus. So we should be able to get an idea of how much current the entire system is drawing. And all of this is just packaged in one nice little unit. So if I want to get any of this information, I can just subscribe to this topic and then pull out the specific piece of information that I want. Wow. Yeah. The main thing that this excites me for, let me shut this down so I can turn the fans off. The main thing that this makes me happy about is that I can, when it comes time to updating the GUI for Jugglebot, which will hopefully not be too far away, then I'm so keen on the idea of having like a really nice display that has all of this information on there. Potentially even having like a 3D model of Jugglebot, and like, there's a lot of information here to display, so I'm not exactly sure how all of this could work, but there could be like I could have the wires in that 3D model, and then like the color of that segment of wire indicates the voltage at that point. And then like the motors can be colored like blue for cold and then red for hot. So we can actually just visually just look at the GUI and say, oh, that motor's running a bit hot right now. That's a bit weird. And just having all of this information there, ready to visualize, it's so good. It's so, so good. Yep. Thankfully, I did this last week. So the motion capture stuff arrived this week, and I am very glad that I got this done last week, because the only thing I've been doing this week is just motion capture. So yeah, I'm glad that I got that finished. So how does this work? Like, how have I set this up so that I can get all of this information quickly, reliably? It's, I think, from memory, the slowest, actually I've got it written down here. So this data I'm getting from the O drives. Let's see. The fastest data that we're getting is at 100 Hertz, and that is the encoder estimates, so like position and velocity, the current estimates, and the status of any errors. So that's all coming through at 100 Hertz for each motor. We've got a couple other things, which is like the temperature and the motor, like the current state that it's in. That's coming through at 10 Hertz, and then the voltage and the current is coming through at 2 Hertz, because I figured like that's not really that important to update all the time. So those are all coming through at random times, which makes it a little bit tricky to, well, not random, but like all different times, which makes it a little bit tricky to like sync it all up and get them all to be published so that we have the latest data for all of them. The way that I've done that is all of this info, I don't know why. Okay, so this is all in CAN interface node and CAN interface.py if you want to check it out. All of the information for a single motor is packaged into motor state single. And so this has fields for all of these different terms. There is a data lock in the CAN interface. So like in here, this is where all of the data is coming through at the rates that I just mentioned. These are all coming through, and they all update their own individual component of that message as that information comes through, to avoid having a race condition where I want to send off the latest piece of information, but at the exact same time that I want to send that off, there's a piece of information coming in that's being updated. That's going to cause issues. And to avoid that happening, I have a data lock on there so that we can't read and write at the same time. Then there's a timer in CAN interface node, which is the ROS2 node. And periodically, from memory that's at 100 hertz, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 100 hertz. Periodically, that will request a copy of the most recent data from the CAN interface itself, and then we publish that out to motor states. So this way we should be able to, we should always have the latest data that's just come through, because that's all on CAN interface. As soon as that data comes in, it's being updated on its own little part of the message. And then, yeah, when we want it, we just take a copy of that data, so that way the rest of it can keep being updated. It can update like a microsecond after we've taken that copy, because once we've taken that copy, we're not affecting that raw data anymore. So that can be overwritten as much as it wants to, and there's not going to be any like conflicts of like, I want this data, no, I want this data, sort of thing. So it's very nice. It's been working extremely reliably so far. There is one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, which is that I have kept all of the stuff for the hand telemetry messages in the code, but just commented out for now. I've gotten rid of all of the other messages. Like we used to have like leg positions, and actually I think that one's still there because that's slightly different. But there was motor positions, motor velocities, motor IQs. These were all separate ROS topics. Those are all gone now. So the whole ROS network is so much cleaner than it used to be. But I have kept the hand telemetry stuff because we may want that data to be coming in even faster. Because the hand is being controlled so quickly, we may want to have its like position and velocity and potentially even current at like 500 hertz rather than 100 hertz, which is the operating frequency of everything else. So I've kind of kept that at just in case we want that, and that way we can kind of, it would be a little bit doubling up. It would mean that the hand motor is being reported in the motor states topic as well as the hand telemetry topic, but I think that should be fine. Yeah. But yeah, for now, I haven't actually like done anything with the hand in the last 3 weeks, so I'm just leaving it there just in case we need it, but yeah, we'll see. Okay, there's one more thing to mention this week, which I'm very excited about, which is that I'm thinking, so there's been an ongoing discussion of what is the best design for Jugglebot's hand. And there's a lot of different considerations here. The type of ball is a big one, but yeah, there's a lot of different things to consider. And I'm thinking a fun way to test a bunch of different ideas could be to have a competition with everyone. And so I'm thinking this could be similar to rctestflight's Propellor Competition, which if you haven't seen it, there's a link in the description. But the general idea is that he made a video basically saying, hey, I'm going to test a bunch of propellers. Your propeller might be the best. Feel free to submit entries, and then he tested them all out. So I'm thinking of doing something similar here where I have a bunch of rules and restrictions about what is and is not allowed, and then you, the people, can submit as many submissions as you like, and yeah, I'll have them all manufactured, and then we can test them all and see which one's actually the best. My proposal here is that we can use the new hand testing rig, which is something else that I've been working on over the last little while, and you can see it here behind me. So what I've got is I've got just the old hand for now, mounted on a linear rail, and there's a spring that acts to pull it back up. So if I let go of that, it will just like launch the ball up. We can also, if we want to, I can just twist this knob a couple times, and it will lock the string so that the hand is now stationary. So this will allow us to test some level of velocity matching where the spring will act to kind of like absorb the motion of the ball. And then we can also test if we have no velocity matching and if the ball is just landing in the hand, just like straight in with the hand being stationary, how well can the hand catch then? And of course this hand is okay, but I mean that was a bit of a bad throw. But it's not fantastic. Like it doesn't. It's a very small hand, so it's not the best. I should have. I'll add a link to the CAD file for this in the description if you want to check it out. Otherwise, let me just open it quickly here so I can show you what that looks like in a bit more detail. So we've got. It's kind of annoying, like moving long, like high aspect ratio parts in, I don't know, any CAD software. But yeah, this is the general idea. So we've got like a big stopper, a massive one because it was getting bumped up very quickly by the spring pulling the hand into it. This is not the hand that I have on there, by the way. It's like cut off like there. I've also got a big foam piece just underneath this stop block, just so the hand doesn't smash into it too aggressively. There's a string that runs through the hand, up over these two pulleys in here, and then down. This is the little locking mechanism. So you can see there's like a little toothed bit that pinches the string in here, and this is where the bolt goes through. And by having this slot, it means that the bolt can, like this can open up quite high without the bolt getting in the way. And there's a spring to push this open, so that way when it's loose, this is held out of the way and doesn't affect the string at all. The string then goes down, attaches to a spring, and then the spring is mounted down the bottom here. Yeah, that's the general idea. I'll put a link to that in the description after the stream ends. Okay, so how will this competition work? My proposal is that we use this hand testing rig for at least part of the competition, and the rules will be that the hands will be manufactured by JLC 3DP, which is a very clean, easy sponsorship opportunity. Probably using SLS nylon, I think, just because it would be cool. I kind of want to make at least one of the hands out of metal, because I think that would be... I'm not really anticipating that being like the actual like option that's used, because it might be a bit heavier, but I just think it'd be so cool to have like a full metal one. But we'll see. This will probably, most of them at least, will probably be SLS nylon. I'm thinking of having a penalty for the hand being too heavy, because of course we want this hand to be moving really, really fast, so weight is not good. I don't know exactly what that weight limit would be, but I've just said 50 grams here. For reference, this one that's on the Jugglebot now, which is a bit too small, is 26.5 grams. So like 50 grams is heaps. Of course, any of the hands that are suggested, they need to be able to interface with the current version of Jugglebot, which does lead into the fact that I think that this competition will likely be a multi-stage competition. As Jugglebot develops, the needs of the hand are going to change. So like a cable robot version of Jugglebot is going to have potentially, who knows, potentially very different needs than this version of Jugglebot. But for now, this is the only version of Jugglebot that I have, at least. Very curious to know how John's is going. But yeah, so for now, it will have to interface with this linear rail here. And that will have to be a set distance out, because if the hand is too close to the rail, then the ball will just hit the rail. To rank the different hands, we can grade them on how quickly the ball settles in the hand. We don't want to have rolling around, and we don't want to have like, I don't know, bumping. Like, we want the ball to just be in the hand immediately. The best thing possible would be, I don't know, maybe a human hand, I don't know, but something that can just get the ball and it is in a known position as soon as it makes contact. There's no kind of like fumbling around. To do that, implementation is a whole thing that we can talk about maybe later, but yep. So settling time would be a big one. Another one will be the number of throws that it can catch. A little while ago, when I've been talking about like using this hand testing rig in the past, I mentioned that I didn't want to make a hand testing rig unless I had some reliable way to get the ball to be moving into that hand with variable like sideways velocities and variable vertical velocities in a reliable way. I was mentioning that I could, like worst case scenario, I could just like stand over here and just like try to throw as reliably as I can, and then I can use that like kind of qualitatively to say, oh, that was a bad throw, but it still caught it, so that's a good thing. Or like that was a good throw and I didn't catch it, that's a bad hand. But like that kind of qualitative measure I think it would be an issue for a competition. If I want to like hard like grade different options, I want that to be as quantitative as possible. Hold that thought. Also, when I've been talking about this hand testing rig, John mentioned that like why go to the effort of making a hand testing rig when you have Jugglebot here? Like just do the testing on Jugglebot. And so I can just take the hand off of Jugglebot, put the new hand on, because that's ultimately where it's actually going to be going, and then we can just do the testing there. I don't really want to do that for a couple of reasons. One is that I plan on being a lot more rough with this hand testing rig than I want to be with Jugglebot, like throwing the balls into it really hard, or like, yeah, just generally being rough with it, and like being able to just try different ways of absorbing the momentum of the ball. But then I realized, hang on, why don't I use Jugglebot to do the throws to the hand, like to the hand testing rig? And that way we can have variable height and variable XY velocities, and we can have them being thrown, hopefully fairly reliably, from Jugglebot every single time. So that way we can say, okay, there's one condition where the ball will be thrown at 30 degrees, at 1 meter high. Can this hand catch it? No. Can this hand catch it? Yes, that hand is better at this throw, or at this catch. So we should be able to use Jugglebot to make those throws, and that way we can, hopefully, quantitatively compare all of the different hand options that we have, which would be pretty cool. There is a question there of how reliably Jugglebot can throw, like how repeatably can it actually make those throws, and that's something that we are yet to know, but I suspect it's going to be good enough. Another thing that is important for these hands is that they are strong enough to withstand a lot of throws and catches. So I'm unsure of how this could be implemented yet. One thought is that I can put the hands on Jugglebot and have them throw, and then I can record that with the slow motion camera and see how much the hand flexes, because it actually does flex by a measurable amount. So maybe that can be one way of doing it. Maybe I can just have it throw and catch like 1,000 times and then see if anything happens, but I suspect, yeah, this is probably not going to be a big one, but it's possible that people will suggest hands that are extremely fragile. So we'll see. Yes, as I mentioned, throws can be made from Jugglebot to the hand rig, and we don't know exactly how precisely Jugglebot can throw, but we can find out. So my big question here, though, is that my biggest hesitation with doing this competition in the same way that rctestflight did is that I don't know if there will be enough submissions to make it kind of worthwhile. So I'm very curious if you, the viewer, think that you could make a submission, and this will involve a little bit of CAD work, which I don't know, is not everyone's fancy, but you know, I will be uploading like templates, like different ones that I have made to say, hey, this is the model that I've got, and this is all in Onshape as well, so it'll be free and you can modify those models however you like. So you can start with like the base framework that I have done. But yes, I'm very, very curious if you think it's likely that you might make one. That'll be very, very useful information for me. Yeah, it'll be a little bit, I don't know, not disappointing, but I don't know, unentertaining, not entertaining if there was like 2 submissions, like, oh, you know, it's a bit lame, you know? So it'd be great if we had heaps. Of course, rctestflight's channel has like significantly more reach than my one does, so it's a little bit tricky to know exactly how many submissions I'll get. Yep. I guess that's the risk we've got to take though. And that, of course, will be a proper video, so we'll have like more exposure than these live streams do. Yeah, but that's the general idea. And even if we don't have enough submissions, I can still make a bunch of different variants. I'm sure John's got some ideas. And yeah, as I said, yeah, let me know if you do. And I'm very keen to just test a bunch of different things out. So maybe I'll just have one where like I just make a bunch of different options and we see how they go. Yeah. Cool. Okay, that was a lot. Big stream, lots of stuff. I don't know exactly how much I'm going to get done next week, of course. I've spent a lot of time this week on Jugglebot, so I need to allocate a bit more to some other things next week to catch up a bit. But yeah, there should be some interesting stuff nonetheless. Oh, there's one other final thing as well, which is that I apologize to everyone on Zulip. I have not gone on Zulip since I left for the Blue Mountains 3 weeks ago. One of my missions for the rest of today is to finally reply to you all. I've been too focused on getting this motion capture stuff set up, and I've just like really wanted to just drill down on this. And every time I let the Zulip messages kind of build up like this, it always takes me a while to get through them all because people have very good suggestions and I want to give them the time that they deserve. And so this has now become something that's probably going to take like my whole afternoon just to catch up. So yes, I apologize. I thank you a lot for all of your contributions, and I am very keen to read through what you've sent me. Cool. That's it. I hope you found that interesting. Good luck, as always, with everything you're doing. And yeah, I'll see you next week.